A chilling purge in the Soviet Union that will leave you speechless. The disappearance of an important aviator whose case has been unsolved for more than 80 years. And a chilling prank that was taken too far. It's time to travel back in time to relive some chilling events that happened in the 1930s that you won't believe are real. Number 4. Leticias Conflict. There's no better way to begin this tour of the chilling events of the 1930s than by learning about the fleeting but violent struggle in which the countries of Colombia and Peru were involved. You'll probably be surprised to see two countries involved in some trouble, but the reality is that between 1932 and 1933, both nations engaged in one of the bloodiest conflicts of the decade. The conflict summed nearly 26,000 soldiers, 1,800 sailors, and more than 15 airplanes in the vicinity of the Putumayo River. A key point for both countries is each disputed the territorial rights of the area. In the absence of a common agreement, Colombia declared the city of Leticia as part of its territory. Both countries positioned their troops, and in September 1932, one of the most unexpected confrontations in South America began. For more than a year, both sides used heavy ground and aerial weaponry in their attacks. The damage to the environment was enormous. Destruction ravaged the land that both sides were trying to impose, and the number of casualties was counted by the hundreds. The conflict dragged on, and regional intervention was required to get the two blokes to sit down and talk. After much effort, Colombia and Peru signed the Solomon-Lozano Treaty, in which they ceded part of the disputed territory and in turn obtained jurisdiction over the areas closest to their borders. Thus, Colombia obtained the left bank of the Putumayo River and part of the Leticia Trapeze, while Peru obtained the San Miguel Sacambayos Triangle. Thus ended one of the bloodiest and most ignored confrontations in the South American history of the 1930s. Number 3. The Great Purge. There's no doubt that one of the darkest and most heartbreaking chapters that surprised the world in the decade of the 1930s was played by the former Soviet Union. That year, Iosif Stalin decided to turn the government upside down and become obsessed with annihilating any divergent cells that threatened his rule. That event was known as the Great Purge and consisted of a decade of absolute distrust in which he initiated one of the greatest political persecutions in history. During this period, it didn't matter if the accused were members of the Soviet Communist Party, if they belonged to the armed forces, or if they were opponents of the regime established by Stalin. Each one of the accused was caught, tried, and sentenced without any legal framework to protect them. The most terrifying aspect of this period of purge was that in the mid-1930s, the use of torture to extract confessions was approved at the institutional level. The perpetrators were men trained to carry out all kinds of humiliating and chilling actions that destroyed any resistance. Thousands of people were killed by means of torture, and unfortunately, there were no consequences for those who carried out such acts. It is estimated that between 1936 and 1938, more than 1 million people were tortured in prison camps, and more than 900,000 were executed for political reasons. In addition, nearly 2 million people were transferred to forced labor camps, and millions of individuals suffered in one way or another from the harsh sentences and attacks carried out in what was undoubtedly one of the darkest periods of Russian history. Number 2. The Mysteries of Amelia Earhart. Let us radically change the scene and concentrate our attention no longer on a big case in a specific country, but on a dark mystery that occurred in the year 1937. The case has Amelia Earhart as its protagonist, the famous American aviator who disappeared in the Pacific Ocean, leaving so many unanswered questions that it has become one of the most controversial cases in history. Amelia was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. She also broke several records at the time and was a hugely influential figure in the world of aviation. However, that year, while flying with her co-pilot Fred Noonan, something went terribly wrong. Amelia's plane disappeared without a trace. The search for any clues to decipher Amelia's whereabouts proved fruitless. For months, rescue teams tried to find some clue that would at least allow them to understand what had happened, but nothing happened. Amelia disappeared without a trace. Surprisingly, in 1940, when the case was already closed, a group of tourists found the human remains of a person on an uninhabited island in the Pacific. This seemed to indicate that Amelia had survived for a time, but that no one came to her rescue. The theory caught on in the press and in several countries around the world, but the analysis was inconclusive, as the corpse was so decomposed that nothing could be determined. Even so, thousands of people were convinced that this was Amelia. That wasn't the only time the mysterious case found a possible answer. Since 1937, dozens of theories have been devised to explain the story of Amelia Earhart, but none of them has enough basis to close the case once and for all. No trace of Amelia's plane had ever been found, nor her body, nor anything that would allow us to know what happened on that flight or what was the end of this courageous and important aviator. Number 1. The Wang case. The following case on the list isn't related to any war matter, nor with a mysterious disappearance, but to an event that impacted several countries of the world. It happened in 1930, when Robert Ripley, the famous creator of Ripley's Believe It or Not, received the photograph of a Russian banker. He was visiting a Chinese province when he crossed the path of an amazing man. His surname was Wang, and in the photograph one could see with chilling accuracy a horn protruding from the back of his neck. It measured about 33 centimeters and gave a chilling appearance to the man, who seemed to show some acceptance of his condition. Robert Ripley was extremely intrigued by the photograph and tried to contact Wang as he wanted to meet him, but the appointment never materialized. Of course, this didn't stop Robert Ripley from pursuing his obsession with the unknown, and in his travels through Europe, Africa, and Asia, he met other unicorns. That was the name they used to refer to their condition. Each one had a horn in the same place as Wang, and most were the same size, between 33 and 24 centimeters in length. In his research, Ripley discovered that these weren't isolated cases, but that in several areas of these continents, many children were born with this condition, although they were immediately surgically removed so that they wouldn't have problems in the long run. Some scholars have tried to understand this rare phenomenon, but their analysis have failed to reveal anything conclusive. The leading theory suggests that they could be caused by exposure to the human papillomavirus, while others are convinced that it is a very particular anomaly occurring in 1 in 100,000 people. Although the Wang case is still treated as something unusual and rarely occurring in humans, history only shows us that the possibility is real, and although the first case we have on record occurred in 1930, this anomaly could have been present in the past without us being aware of it. 00. The following case has been the talk of the town since 1937, when an event shook the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts. Apparently, a group of bathers had sighted a monstrous creature at least 15 meters long, with a creepy shape that made it stand out from any other marine animal they had ever seen in their lives. The newspaper echoed this news, and the entire population began to organize hunting parties to catch what they called the monster of Nantucket Beach. For several weeks, the hunters managed to find a disturbing trail. It was a series of grotesquely sized footprints in the sand that appeared to belong to the monster, although they were still inconclusive. Although it was clear that something was happening there, they seemed artificial, as if someone had made them. Upon further investigation, the entire population collided with a harsh reality. This had been a well-organized hoax by a group of local young people. Their recklessness had gone too far, and although their intention was never to create such a stir, once it got out of control, it was impossible to stop it. Society was stunned by what had happened. They had been deceived in the worst way, but for some reason, far from being upset or angry, they decided to make a celebration out of it. That year, the tradition of the Nantucket Monster began to be celebrated. The streets of the island were filled with parades and all kinds of ingenious allegorical forms to enjoy a well-done joke. Eventually, the tradition was lost, but it was one of the most disturbing historical moments in this part of Massachusetts and has been chronicled in numerous books since. Cases like these show us that sometimes a well-told story can convince a lot of people of anything. As you can imagine, this isn't the first time that something similar has happened, although on other occasions what seemed like a joke actually ended up being something real and chilling. If you'd like to find out a little more about it, then you'd better follow us in the next videos and see for yourself what happened in these cases.